Welcome back, everyone. Second day. This is even more interactive, hopefully. We're having a Johan workshop after coffee. Before the coffee, we have a lot of online opportunities as well. So Dion is now online from Australia. We didn't seem to reach Robin, who's leading the IDS project at the moment. So Dion also to do a bit of a broader introduction on objective scope. And then I think he quite rapidly dive into the technical details as well. So just a reminder from the workflows from yesterday, we have IFC, that's the data standard, that's how data is being exchanged. We can explain something about the data, talk about the data with BCF, the big collaboration formats. But before that starts, we can also define requirements. What do you need to see in that IFC file? Which entities do you want to see? What classifications do you need to have? What properties? What are the values? Setting that requirement from a client perspective is what we do in IDS, in an IDS XML. So that was a very quick introduction. I do hope Dion has a little bit of a broader introduction. I think so. After this, we have bSDD. That's also a little bit hybrid, bit me, bit online, bit Frederick. It's like I said, a bit of an interactive day today. So looking forward. Are you ready, Dion?
Yep. So
here. Do you introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Dion Moult. I've been involved with OpenBIM for a while now. I've been working a lot with open source libraries such as IFC OpenShell in helping implement I guess user libraries, a user-facing interface to interact with IFC, and also work with IFC not only as an exchange format, but also as a native data structure which people can manipulate. If you've heard of the Blender BIM add-on, I'm also one of the people behind that. That's I also work in Australia. You can see it's around 11 p.m. over here. So if I'm a little bit woozy, that's just because I had a bit of a nap. And I'm also slightly unprepared for today. I was expecting to come on in 15 minutes, which was my usual strategy of listening to the previous presentation, getting a feel of the tone of and the level of technical discussion that usually happens. And I was also planning to spend about half an hour uploading a bunch of docs that I wanted to show, but that's not going to happen. So I'm going to just wing it and see how successful this is. So I work in Australia for a company called Lend-Lease, and they do all sorts of things. I like to think of them as a full stack AEC firm, which means that they buy the land, they design the thing, they build the thing, they engineer the thing, and they run the thing. And hopefully they demolish the thing and start over. And so there's a lot of disciplines involved, and that gives me a very good idea of a good exposure of the holistic nature of IFC, which is one of the things which makes IFC so great, which is that it touches so many disciplines at the same time. It's not just kind of limited in scope to one or two disciplines. So it starts, it has what we traditionally see in your BIM models from the big five disciplines, the architects, the structural, the three, the MEP, F, sorry, the big six, I guess, the big six disciplines. But then it also goes into costing, scheduling, and used by sustainability consultants and the lesser, I guess, well, the not as big roles. And a big part of that is specifying requirements. And that's where IDS comes in. So IDS stands for Information Delivery Specification. There it is on my screen. Hopefully you can all see it clearly. It's basically bSDD's answer to the question of how do I say what data, what information I want in a model, and automate the 80% of model checking that is just standardized across the industry. I mean, every single project has an execution plan, a strategy, a set of client requirements, something along those lines, saying I want this in my model. And it's usually something very simple, like these properties must be in the model. And then somebody has to go and check it to make sure that they actually have put those properties in the model. And that covers about 80% of the requirements that our industry has. Things like, I want this object to have certain attributes. I want these types of objects to have certain properties. I want these types of objects to have certain materials. or I want these certain objects to have certain classification systems. So these types of the 80-20 rule of what are the most common requirements that industry have been kind of codified into a computer interpretable standard known as IDS, and just make it easy for you to do that model checking. Of course, there's the other 20% of things which IDS does not do, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So I guess one of the things which I really wanted to do in the 20 minutes leading up to when I was hoping to speak was to publish this repository along with a bunch of test files, but that didn't happen. So I'll just show it to you directly. And this is kind of my answer to if somebody says, just kind of, where's a guide I can read about what IDS is? This is a document that was written, as you can see, about 2 months ago, which was an attempt to be the IDS documentation. I want you all to pretend you never saw this logo, because that's not the official logo, and I have yet to delete it. So we've been over this already. This is the buildingSMART standard for specifying and checking simple information requirements. So here's a nice diagram which explains it. Basically, somebody gives you an IFC model, and you give somebody an IDS file, and that's what an IDS is. It's a file. It ends in .ids. It's an XML file inside, so you can open up in a text editor if you're curious and change things until it breaks. And inside of it, it has a list of specifications. And you know, the simplest type of specification is over here. All walls must have a fire rating property. And you can either give that at the beginning and say, here are my specifications, and say, you know, you must have this fire rating property. It's envisioned that the model authoring tool may integrate with IDS so that they can make sure that you're providing that the requirements of the IDS as part of the IFC generation process. Or maybe it doesn't. You know, it doesn't do anything, have that sort of integration. And once your IFC is generated, you can go and check that IDS using your model checker of choice. And there's a variety of IDS participants which will be providing an integrated, which will be providing support for checking IDSs along with ISCs. And that will give you know, some green ticks and some red crosses, and you can see how well you did. And the results of that IDS can be then turned into a report. And one of the report formats which is envisioned is the BCF, although that has not been fully specified yet of exactly how to encode the results into BCF, but I believe it is the intention. Examples of software vendors that have been working with IDS. I'm very hesitant to say some names here, but for example, Celebri, which is pretty famous as a model checker, they are also looking at IDS and implementing it. I think XBIM as well has been looking at it. For those who use IFC OpenShell, we've also been having an implementation, which we'll look at shortly. And I want to say more names here, but I'm afraid of saying things that I don't fully know, so maybe I won't. Okay, so the rest of this guide goes into a lot more detail, but there's kind of 3 steps which you can run without understanding the full technical details. So maybe we'll do that here. So the first is getting your favorite software. So let's say you download Celebri with their new IDS feature, or you download Blender with its new IDS feature, or you download XBIM with its new IDS feature, and so on. Then you'll download a sample IDS file, and this currently links to a to-do page, so that's not going to do me very good, but that's okay. I will show you another sample IDS file. And in this file, I was intending to have 2 simple specifications saying that the project name should be test, and the second one saying that all walls should have a fire rating property. You get a IFC model to check, you load them both, and you press the check button. So we can try test that, and none of this is tested because I was hoping to test it in the past. Let's see, no, that's not it. That's not it either. That's not it. Hey, here we are. Okay, so here is a little IDS viewer, and you can actually I'll give you a link later if you want to play with it yourself. So we'll start it with a new spec, and then I will load a minimal set of requirements. So here are the bare minimum requirements which I've created for my company Lend-Lease, but there's nothing interesting here, so that's okay. Everyone can take a look at it. So it has a list of specifications. You can see in this IDS there are 11 specifications. The first one is to do with the title says project metadata, and it says that, hey, for the purposes of client submittal, archival, benchmarking, and all that, you know, all project data needs to have a name, long name, and description, and object type, and phase, and so on. And you know, this is a fairly standard clause in every single BIM execution plan. They'll say the project name is X. Please fill in your project name as X. The project description is such and such. You know, the phase is the construction phase, or the design phase, and so on. So there's absolutely nothing different here. Just that this is now encoded into an IDS. I might make this a bit bigger. There we are. And so that's step one over here. Oh, step one was opening a web link. Step two was a file on my computer, the sample IDS, which if you want, I'll distribute online so everyone can take a look. And now we all need a sample model, and let's just load a random, who knows what I'm going to find here. Oh, sorry, audit model. There we are. Tested IFC. This will probably all fail completely, and it did because it wasn't intended to be run against this check. And it says that, you know, fail, 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 fail. So great. So here's our report that we can see that we have not met the information requirements. And that's pretty much IDS from a user in a nutshell. And in this case, well, this file will fail completely. You'll see a number 1 here because it's found one IFC project element, which is a good thing. If it found more, I'd be scared. Or 0, I'd be scared. But clearly, the name does not match the project code or the long name and so on. Over here, you can see that this test file I fed in actually had no protected CRS data, which is why we see a 0 here. So in that case, it has not only failed this test, it's failed this test because the data was not included. So that's and it doesn't really matter which IDS software you're using. Generally, you'll have that same workflow if you're looking at it from the model checking perspective. There would be a slightly different workflow if you're looking at it from how to use IDS to kind of ensure that your IFC generation is going correctly from your model authoring package. But this is looking at it from the client handing out a set of requirements and checking the model that he gets back. By the way, feel free to shout out with any questions as I'm going through. Okay, so that's kind of like the big picture of how IDS works. I might rerun this test one more time, and this time I'm going to use the command line, and I have no idea if people can see the text here or if it's too small. So I'm going to run a command here called IFC tester, and it's the same system that runs in the back end of this little web app. And it's got that a minimal IDS that I just showed you, along with a random tests IFC model, which I have no idea what's inside of it. And of course, here we see that everything has failed. And this time it shows you in funky console coloring. So it's just different reports, different possible reports. So you can see here that it says the name should be project code, and it says your attribute is currently set to my project, not project code. So that's why you failed the requirements. So what I'm going to do over here is, let's say I got that back. I would open up my test model, which is a wall, I guess, with a thing in it. And I will go and open up my project. I'll make this a bit bigger. And the requirements state that the name should be project code. So let's just hit edit there, and let's call this project code. We'll save attributes, and we'll save that. And now if I run it, hopefully we'll see one green, and we do. So this is telling me that my test, my specification has now passed. And that's good news. Okay, we're not going to keep on going through, but hopefully you get the idea. So if that's the big picture, we'll now zoom into and take a look a little bit more under the hood. How does a spec work? A spec, there's a nice paragraph here, but what I want to highlight here is that there are three main sections to a specification. So there's a description section, which is a human readable section. So IDS was designed so that, well, as you can see here, it almost reads like a contractual document. And this is the description section which you're seeing here. So anybody can read it and say, and answer the question, why do I have to provide this information? What's the impact the project's going to have if I don't provide this information? And I feel this is something that should not be understated. I know it's from a technical perspective, it's easy. It's just a text field, but from the perspective of explaining to a non-technical project manager why they have to, their project team has to invest in providing high quality BIM data, this is the most important part of an IDS. It tells you, what are you missing out on? You can talk about coordinate reference systems, but unless you're doing this type of stuff, it doesn't have any value. So this is the bit which provides the human context to it. So once you finish with all of that, you then have two more sections. The first one called applicability and the second called requirements. The applicability says, for this specification, let's say providing project metadata, what type of data does it apply to? So in this case, it applies to all IFC project data, or in this case, it applies to all IFC projected CRS data, or IFC map conversion data, or IFC grid access data, or IFC site data, or so on, IFC building data. So this is your kind of a filter saying this set of, this type of objects that pass this applicability filter must have requirements, certain requirements. And the requirements is the third section of a specification, which is basically what information you need on the aforementioned objects that pass this applicability. So here's a practical example. All walls must have a fire rating. The description is, I'm going to read it out just because it's clear as it is. Fire ratings are critical. We want fire rating properties. This applies to wall objects. Okay, the requirements are, must have a fire rating property. And that's how you split it up for the computer to read. All walls must have a fire rating property. And whereas the description is just human text, the applicability and requirements are described using what's known as information facets. And there are 6, I think, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 6. Don't read this. I got to edit this. There are 6 types of facets of describing information that you can use in your applicability or your requirement spec. The 6 are entity, like an IFC wall or predefined type, IFC wall.shear. Attributes, saying that you must fill out a direct attribute of an IFC object. A classification system. So these are things like IFC classification and IFC classification reference. Then you have properties, which are your properties in your property sets. Materials, which are the whole bunch of various ways you can apply materials in IFC, starting from simple single materials to material sets. And parts, which just the personal thing here. I think the best way to describe it are relationships more than parts. So when something is grouped in something else, or aggregated in something else, or contained in something else, these types of IFC relationships. And so you can see there's a lot of stuff not covered here. So for example, we don't cover actor relationships, we don't cover document relationships, and that's okay. This is just to cover the 80% of simple requirement specifications. And when you use these facets in either the applicability or the requirements section, they have different meanings. So if you provided an entity facet with a class and a predefined type of wall and shear, if you use it in the applicability section, it has this meaning. It applies to IFC walls with a predefined type of shear, so all shear walls. So this specification requirement applies to shear walls. Whereas if you used it in the requirements section, it would say that the objects must be a wall that is a shear wall, and so on. So there's kind of this symmetry of meanings depending if you use these facets and their parameters in the applicability and the requirements. And there's a whole bunch of examples given in this doc. More examples over here. You can just read off the screen. I'm not going to read it to you, of how you might describe various things. So here is a specification. Here are how you might describe the applicability in terms of its facets. And here's how you might use facets to describe its requirements. So I'll leave that on the screen for a few seconds. Maybe a few more seconds. Just skimming through. Cool. All right, so hopefully that's all making sense. If it's not, just shout out. Naturally, specifications can be required or optional. So for example, you might want to say, I must absolutely find this information in the model, or you might want to say, if you have something which passes this applicability filter, then it must pass these requirements. But if you don't have anything, that's okay as well. Or you might want to say the complete opposite. You must say, I don't want to see this in the model at all. Specifications are also specific to the IFC schema. So you will specify which schema you want. Or you can specify a list. So you can say that this can either be just these two schemas, for example. And if you provide data that doesn't match that schema, then you don't pass the spec. And here are examples of things which you cannot check with IDS that are considered out of scope. So things like geometry checks. You cannot do calculated checks. So you cannot say that the sum of all of these areas cannot be greater than such and such. You cannot test for uniqueness. So you cannot say that all my wall type names must be unique, because that's an aggregate check right now. So it doesn't solve everything. That's okay. And this is also version 1. But that was also the goal. The goal was to have IDS as a simple specification that covers the 80% of most common information requirements. And I've written a whole bunch of information requirements for my employer, Lend-Lease, and I think that they've succeeded in that goal. There's a lot I can translate. Of course, there's some I cannot translate to IDS. And IDSs are seen as an appendix in a set of client requirement documents, but a lot certainly can be translated. Excuse me. Okay, so in your own time, you can read this kind of the 10-step guide to IDSs, and we've just looked at the first two. I guess I'll whet your appetite on complex restrictions. So when you're specifying a value, you can specify as an enumeration. So you can say, for example, my fire rating must be, in Australia, we'll use exact values. You can say it must be --60, or it must be 120, 120, 120. You cannot choose anything in between or any other value. You can specify basic rejects or bounds. It must be within this value range. And there's a few other strange things that came through because we're reusing the XML restriction entity. But I think the most common ones that people will be using are things like the value must be ABC, or meet this reject pattern, or between this range. And there are a few more examples of that, which I won't bore you with, but it gives a bunch of examples. And this is meant to be read by non-super technical people, so there's a lot of examples in these documents, including rejects examples, because it's expected that people will be using rejects for a lot of their requirements as well, but many people don't know rejects, so there's a lot of simple examples like that. Then it walks through the facets one by one, and for every single one, it gives a description for people who might not have any idea how IFC entities work. So it'll give them a crash course in it in the first paragraph. It will give you example names of what you can put down. So it guides you through that process of how to fill out these things. It teaches you how to find how to specify this in the IFC documentation so you're not left in the dust, right? For most people, if you want to tell them to specify an IFC class name, they'll be like, where do I begin? Where do I find the list of classes? This answers those questions. It tells you what parameters, whether they're required, a description. It gives a ton of examples of what you might want to specify. And there you go. And it just does this again and again and again for everything. I'll just randomly click on one. Let's say property. Ooh, that didn't work. Oh, yes, properties is the one I shouldn't click on because it's still not 100% finished. Classifications is another. So yeah, a whole bunch of examples. And so I'll give you well, actually, I won't give you a link because it should be published here tomorrow morning. I promise I will do it. And then you'll be able to read it in a nice documentation folder over here. Okay, so that's the user-facing documentation. I want to quickly jump down into the software documentation. So when implementing this, there's a few things you'll need. There is a XSD schema, which you can download. I might need to check if that's the latest link. And there will also be a series of sample IDSs, which I will slowly be publishing, and other people have also published some sample IDSs. And the criteria is you must pass the XSD check. You must provide a valid schema and not go and adjust it to create your own proprietary extension. And anytime you load an IDS, if you're creating an IDS authoring application, you don't lose data. So you preserve all the information. And most importantly, you pass the test cases. So you can, if buildingSMART is releasing a model checking thing, and if model checker A gives a different result from model checker B, then nobody's going to have any faith in IDS. So it's absolutely critical that every single model checker behaves exactly the same. So there's a series of test cases which explain exactly what's going to happen in a whole bunch of edge case scenarios that I didn't even realize until I started implementing IDS. And in fact, I just realized another one because I just remembered that if anybody's in the audience here thinking, resources can have classifications assigned too, and I haven't implemented that. So there's a whole suite of, what's wrong with this? Why with all my test cases? It's all linking to broken to-dos here. Oh, here we are. Here's a bunch of test cases. So, for example, let's say you want to implement entities. You got basic things like, what if somebody specifies IFC rabbit? Well, it fails. Like, we know that it fails. We get that it fails, but still, we should explicitly spell it out. So it has a fail, and every single test case will give you a sample snippet of XML that you'll find in the IDS. It'll give you a sample snippet of IFC that you'll see in a relevant IFC. You can also download a sample IDS and IFC. This one I haven't uploaded, but they are there. Like, for example, if I go into here, here's a whole bunch of IDS and IFC files for every single test case. So you can open any one of these and you'll be able to see, here you go. Here's a really base scenario of an IDS. You can see it's XML, a single specification, the applicability of a wall with, in this case, the requirements that the material should be foo. And so it's got, for something as simple as entity, it's got a lot of test cases covering all sorts of things that, I don't know, maybe you might not immediately think of, but it's there. And it goes through, again, you can look at this in your own time. Here you are for attributes. So for example, what happens if somebody specifies an inverse attribute, and the answer to that is that, well, we want that to fail. We don't want anybody specifying inverse attributes. And if you don't agree with this, that's okay. That's where the IDS working group comes in. But this is the current first pass at coming through with a consistent set of test cases across a whole bunch of requirements. And most of these are pretty pretty basic and obvious, and that's the way it should be. We don't want any nasty surprises from model checking, but it's good to cover all of the edge cases. So for example, what happens if you want, IDS can only do simple value checks. It can say that I want my name to be X, but what if you want to say I want my owner history to be X? What should happen in that scenario? And so there's a test case for that, which tells you exactly what will happen. And again, every single test case has an accompanying IDS and an IFC, so you can test it yourself. Okay, so this little web app that I showed you here, there's a little online version if you wanted over here. Maybe we can share this link later on. This allows you just viewing. I haven't enabled file uploads yet for checking. So you can create a new spec or multiple new specs if you wanted to. And you can, let's say, load one set of specs or load multiple specs and compare them and just read. And the idea is that sooner or later, we'll have a library of IDSs being distributed, possibly by local bSMART chapters as well, which are related to their local government requirements, and companies can be using them basically to drag and drop the bits that are applicable to them, and then just I don't know, customize it for themselves. So you can say Australian window type naming. Australian window types must have this followed by Roo because we have kangaroo windows over there. And that's pretty much it. So hopefully that was a good crash course about IDS and what's available. If you have a developer library, it'll be so cool to get a directory over there so that people can get started developing things. I've heard of XBIM and IFC OpenShell having a developer library. If there are more out there, it would be great to know. And hopefully we can also get some things added to the software directory, which currently links to the technical bSMART software implementations page. And so hopefully there'll be a nice new column here in the future. I think that's it for my presentation. If somebody wants, none of these, well, that one I know where I should link to. If somebody wants to look at code, the code which generates all of these documentations is all open source, which we can link to. It's in a folder called IFC Tester. And so you can see one example implementation there if you want to see the implementation details. It's written in Python, which is basically pseudo code with slightly less punctuation. Yeah, so you can see under test, you can see a doc generator as well as a whole bunch of test cases of what should happen in different scenarios. So this is the code behind what generates what you saw over here. Okay, I'm done there. Did that make any sense?
Thanks, Dion. Looking around the room for questions, comments.
I have a question. Dion, this is Anhal. You said that you wanted to make sure that every implementer of IDS gave the same result, which makes a lot of sense to me. How do you deal with, or is there some unified way to deal with double comparisons? So for example, if your fire rating is in minutes, your fire rating has to be at least 60 minutes. Does 59.99999 fail or pass? Because that seems like that would be a fairly common computer problem to have.
Correct. So there's a couple of issues which are specific to properties, which is why when I clicked that property link, it went to a to-do page, not because I haven't written any unit tests for properties, but because there are things like that which have not been 100% resolved. One example, as you say, is comparison of numbers. There's also comparison of numbers with units. Some people care about the units. Some people don't care about the units, right? Somebody might say, I want it to be greater than X square meters, but if you give it to me in feet, I don't care. That's good. That's great as well. Sometimes they might say the opposite. They'll say, actually, your units must be in meters for this property. Those are just the simple units, of course, and you get the more complex units. That has not yet been resolved. it has to be resolved, which is why that page is not yet released, and that's one of the big issues holding back, I believe, the official IDS release. Don't have an answer for you, but I agree with you. It's super important and needs to be solved.
Great, thanks.
Having answered that, I also want to point to Pasi here. I'm not sure if you're aware, Dion, but Pasi is in the room as well, who has a strong guiding opinion on this. Do you want to pitch in?
I think it is so that fire rating is fixed. So, yeah, and it would be like the requirement would be an enumeration, like one of these. If you would have a fire rating of 50, and that would have the other thing that I pushed really heavily that work with IDS file. We use SI unit. Taking always have the length in meters and temperature in Kelvin and so on. We only need to do one conversion. So then comparing, if you're running in serial unit, you will compare it. You would like decide what are the colors.
Okay. Can you do, as for either, can you do some things that we do in the US, like door, can I check a wall, and if a wall has an hour that the door in it has a 30? Is that those kinds of part checks possible?
Cross entity.
Well, so the
complex
part
entities or
yeah, so like part would get you the door is hosted by the wall or has a relationship with the wall. I can't remember what we call it, but can you use that to then as a second filter?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and I think in this specific example, the answer would be yes. But I think what you're touching on is an example of I want to test my design requirements. This project has these design requirements. There's a couple of those examples as well in what Dion showed on what's not possible, like the minimum amount of square space needs to be 300 square meters. Those are all specific design requirements for your design. And there's a lot of tools out there, Pasi's tool, for example, like Solibri, where you can write specific rules for that design that you want to continuously check. And IDS is much more about how do I want my information to be delivered. It's really an information delivery specification. So you really say, I need walls, and the walls need to have these properties. And so the restriction of the values is already a little bit moving up towards checking the correctness of the data. But in principle, it's much more like this is what kind of information I need and where I need to find it. Because then my kind of tool next in the tool chain can automate that data and do a lot of different checks or analysis, energy simulations, cost analysis, whatever. Much more on information delivery specification and trying not to do too much at this moment on real design requirement check.
Yeah, I would just make the distinction that there's some, seems like I perfectly understand the distinction of like not the correctness of the data, but that there's a line that's like, that's a consistency, right?
Yeah.
I don't have a logical paired values would be a good way to think about the evolution of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
On the design check thing, it would be a shame if we stopped developing this to support design workflows. Because we use Solibri all the time. It's a pain in the ass to write rules. I would like to write them once and be able to deploy them easily and all that sort of stuff. So that's a blocker.
Yeah. I think there's, like you said, it's an evolution, and it's also a bit of a range. It's scale. It's also not specific IDS or design. There's a gray area in between. It's also what we see currently. And there's also this balance, of course, between keeping standards simple and implementable by a lot of people towards having a very detailed standards to support all of the zoning use cases. That's where we're at. But definitely, this is currently 0.9, hopefully 1.0 soon, and then to evolve from there.
So on your comment that there should be SI units, I tend not to agree. The US will not work in meters or square meters. I think we need on the parameters to be able to specify the unit of the value. And even worse, in the UK, we use miles, defining in metric.
And the thing is that
I just want to jump in here and interrupt for the whole units discussion, because this has been discussed to the death. And I think the one thing we all agree upon is that there are two perspectives. There's one crowd which just wants to specify a value in SI, you know, and convert to that value and check against that value. And there's another crowd which is less interested in the value, but also interested in the unit of that value. So there's a unitless crowd and there is a unit-focused crowd. They're both important. So I think the answer is that IDS will sooner or later support both workflows, a unitless workflow and a unit-specified workflow. Exactly how that looks like, there's been a few proposals put forward. Currently, out of the box, IDS supports the unitless workflow, but there have been proposals of how to make it additionally support a unit workflow. I've also written hundreds of specifications for my employer, and so far, I haven't actually needed to care about the unit. Surprisingly, I haven't needed to care. It's discussed more than I think it actually impacts IDS. Like it has an impact on a few things, but less than you'd imagine compared to the amount of discussion happening around it. But yes, I see both perspectives, and it will be addressed.
Actually, that would be my next question, Dion. Are you kind of allowed to show those tests, or is it?
Is this being recorded?
Yes.
Well, then no. But look, I already showed, like, for example, here is one. And some of these are just so mind-numbingly basic that I mean, there's no reason why they wouldn't be shared, and they will be increasingly shared. So for example, I've got a set of requirements here, either the bare minimums, things like get your project name right, name your grids, name your building right, start putting your materials into categories. So for goodness sake, can we please go and identify all concrete things in a building? Then there's also things like naming. So for example, we sit down on every single project and say, here's your naming scheme for spaces, wall, doors, windows, furniture, sanitary, columns, beam, like just the big ticket items for every single piece of kit per discipline. We say, here's your naming, here's a reject rule, we've encoded it in. Now you've got to be consistent. We don't, and so that's one example. And naming is super critical. I mean, you get so far just with good naming. It's crazy how far you can get. Even if you get all the rest of your information wrong, with good naming, it's a solid, clear foundation. There's also others I can possibly share, like FM. Sure, why not? So there is work being done on the kind of, I guess, the successor to COBie, called the IFC Building Equipment Maintenance. Is that the new name? Building Equipment Management, something like that. This is
asset operations handover, building systems equipment maintenance.
That. There we go. Rolls off the tongue. So this is my first attempt at encoding what is possible into an IDS, and of course, there's many things in the I'm not going to say IFC asset thing that cannot be translated in IDS. Like, for example, it would cover things like actors for manufacturers and suppliers, and that cannot yet those relationships cannot be checked. You can check that an actor exists and it has the right roles in it, sure, but you can't check that an object has an actor assigned to it, for example. So here's my attempt of how to do these things in an IDS. Maybe I should stop scrolling through because there are some. This is also a Revit specific one with some simplifications made, and I don't want.
Just very quickly on that one, just to go back, you were checking the length and the area units.
Correct. So that was. Yes, that's one approach of doing it. So, for example, you can say that all SI unit where you have length, but this is again not 100% guarantee because you cannot guarantee that SI unit is actually assigned to the project, and that's one of the shortcomings of IDS right now. So, sure, I can give an entity facet, say that IFC SI unit of this must have that, but there could be lots of SI units with length unit being used as derived units or other named units or conversion units, and this test would give a false positive. So this is kind of like the least bad. So yes, there are known shortcomings to do with units right now. There are probably better ways of doing this, and I would delete this once that better way is put in. But until that, I have just thrown this in as an example.
Are the capabilities of this identical to XSD? And is there an intent to either keep it identical or to modify, expand?
Yeah, so on the value restrictions, I would even say it's not identical to XSD, it is XSD.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Actually using the XSD namespace for all of the XSD restrictions.
Okay, so it is XSD?
Yes.
Okay, good. And there's no intent to keep it that way?
I take a lot of pride in reusing existing standards that are broadly supported instead of inventing something.
Yeah, so I guess for values. Oh, okay.
Go ahead,
sorry. For values, there's generally two options. You can either have a simple value, which is it's actually a text field, which currently have rules on typecasting, with the intention that we're not going to, with the plethora of data types in IFC, we're not going to enforce the user to say that, whether this text is an IFC label or an IFC text or an IFC identifier. We're just going to say it's text, and there's a bunch of rules of typecasting that. But then there's also the XSD value option, which gives you those. I think there's 6 restrictions or so, which I showed in the doc earlier on.
Right. So just on that you showed the 6 or 8 things that you're doing. Is that obviously that's not what XSD is doing? And so where is that limitation? Is it in what IDS is intending to do? Is it in his implementation?
Sorry, I didn't understand. What was the question?
Well, at the beginning you showed like 5 things that it's checking the names, it's checking a bunch.
Oh yeah, the facets. Sure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, these 6 things.
Yeah, okay. So obviously XSD, these aren't restrictions of XSD. So where is this limitation?
So it's just
is it in the IDS specification, or is it in his particular implementation?
So
No.
This is you still have to interpret it.
Entity, attribute, classification, property, material parts. These are the 6 things this software is doing. Is this the 6 things IDS is doing?
Inside IDS, you can.
Okay, so IDS right now is only going to do these 6 things.
Yeah.
Okay, and over time it may expand.
Yeah.
But that's the specification.
Yes.
Around.
And in all of these 6 things, use the XSD
The
restrictions
full.
for the values.
Yeah. So for example, let's say you want to specify an attribute. And now if I go into the attribute facet, the 2 parameters are name and value, and you can see whether or not an XSD restriction is allowed. So you are allowed to specify an XSD restriction for both the name and value. So in theory, you can say that here you are. Use a pattern restriction for my value, or you can use a simple value for my value.
Are the quantity sets covered under properties?
Yes.
Okay.
The quantities are a bit interesting because quantities. Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, quantities have fixed units, you wanted to say.
Well, quantities is not just in properties I want to mention, because attributes can also have length measures. So for example, the famous one is in map conversion, right? If you want to specify, lock it down in your spec that here is your map conversion that you're going to be using for georef, that's a unit. So it's, a lot of people think it's just limited to properties, but it does also turn up here and there in attributes.
Right. Also looking at time, also Australian time, I guess it's just past midnight.
Yep, it's the weekend.
Last questions or shout-outs?
This might be an easy one too. The current model view definition, would IDSs be created for those?
No, so model view definitions is a combination of concept templates and exchange requirements. So for the exchange requirements, you can use IDS. But we explicitly don't want to allow users to define a subset of different concept templates. So we also covered this yesterday a little bit. The MVDs are kind of implementation levels that we want to limit as much as possible to make sure that software vendors really have stable things to implement. Then on top of that, the exchange parts, what do I need, that is being covered with IDS. And actually, thanks to all of the XSD restrictions, IDS has more flexibility and more functionality than I have with MVDs.
So you could write all the MVDs in IDS?
Exchange requirements parts of those.
User, they will be extended, for example, later it could come for validation for relationship. How about geometry, for example?
Yeah, relationships are already in there quite a bit. Geometry, you just had the same question yesterday, right? You're testing me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
so for,
we will talk about this today.
yeah, for geometry, we have the SEN group, the European Standardization Institute is working on kind of continuing further on just data and also defining requirements for geometry. And we're following that work and see where that goes. And then, because that's a really broad consensus searching organization as well. If they have a way forward, then we're to hopefully implement that on IDS as well.
Is there a way to see any of that progress without being part of a SEN group?
I don't know, Frederick, you're quite aware of all of those SEN procedures. Can you follow the SEN work of levels information needs without being in?
Well, yes and no. This is pushed at ISO level, so there will be an international working group on this.
So you could talk to your US
Yeah.
ISO representative.
Actually, that person.
Cool.
I'm on the email distribution group, so.
Nice, solved.
There we go.
But yeah, it has been agreed that the standard is pushed at ISO level, then the new parts will be worked at international levels.
Cool. Okay. Also looking at our time schedule, we still have a lot to cover on bSDD. So thank you very much, Dion. Again. Thanks for staying up so late, and I'm going to keep you to the promise that documentation will be pushed to the official repo. It's probably our evening as well, and your morning, right?
It depends when I wake up. I could wake up at 10, 11, 12, pushing it. But yes, it'll happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, have a good night. See you then, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. All right, so next topic is bSDD. We have Erik online as well, or I should be screen sharing now, right? Next part is the bSDD workshop. So we're going to have 3 topics this morning in 2 sessions. So maybe the coffee break will be a little bit later. So bSDD, I'm aware that some of you are completely new to bSDD, so I'll do a use case introduction first. And then we have Erik Baars online, the main developer of bSDD, who can do something like 10-minute presentation on pointing you to where all of the resources and the documentation are, a little bit similar to what Dion just did, but then for bSDD. And we also have Frederick, who has a similar use case and a bit of a broader story as well, the story before bSDD and the story after bSDD, as an inspirational presentation. Any questions up front? Something I should cover? All right. Now let me try to do the presentation on what is bSDD. So as we saw yesterday as well in the workflows, so IFC covers a lot. There's a lot of standard classes in IFC and a lot of standard properties, but there's always some kind of limitation. So there's only so much you can put in IFC. And in general, the rule is also, if we can find international consensus on what a thing is, then it can be in IFC. If it's something local,
Go ahead, I'll try to switch up.
if it's something more local or very domain specific that you can't expect all of the vendors to support, then it should not be in IFC. But those standards still exist. So we have national classification standards. This is making me lose the audio. This is too appealing.
Yeah. Put some oxygen in too.
So I've showed this triangle, this pyramid, where you say we have very generic standards at the top, like geometry standards, and an object can be anything, and then we're kind of restricting it a little bit more on the IFC level. An object with a certain geometry that has certain characteristics we always call a door, and this is our definition of a door, but that drips down to a very detailed level very soon. So the national classification systems, there's 20 different door types in the Netherlands that are completely different than the 20 door types that are in Germany. So in IFC, we have only one door because that's the maximum consensus we can find in IFC. But in practice, we still need to have those 20 door types, which are a little bit different everywhere. Also, domain-specific stuff like ETIM, quite a popular international standard in Europe, at least, on electrical and MEP stuff. There's a lot of very detailed information in there as well, which is being supported by a lot of manufacturers and a lot of sales channels. So it's really helpful to have that information in an IFC file as well, without having to put it in the IFC standards. And there's a balance where how do you use the IFC standards and how do you combine that with all of those other initiatives and other standards as well. And that's where the bSDD comes in. So bSDD is an online database, it's a service, it's not a standard. And in that online database, everyone is free to publish their domain. So we have Uniclass in there, we have NLSFB in there, which is the National Dutch Classification System. ETIM is in there. That database also gives the ability to connect different properties and different classes to each other. So ETIM, for example, is connected to IFC, and NLSFB is connected to IFC, and that really gives the opportunity for users to very effectively enrich an IFC file. And I think there's 2 really good examples on this. One is this one from ACA. I think I showed this, I told about this yesterday as well. So this is an IFC file. It's been opened in one of the CDEs from ACA. And as you see, there's solar panels there. There's no IFC solar panel, but still you want to classify those objects and you want to further enrich them, add properties to them. And that's where ETIM comes in. So what this tool, ACA tool, does is it connects to the bSDD, and it says, give me all of the ETIM objects, and then it connects to the API of the bSDD, pulls all of the ETIM classes objects, The user searches through them. There's a lot of weird codes here, but eventually they find, so like the lamps is in here as well. Eventually they find big cells, I guess is the official term, under renewable energy. And the user in this case selects all of those objects in the IFC file, and then clicks on the right here to say, okay, add this data object, this class, this group of objects, this classification from the bSDD, add that to these selected elements. So now in the IFC file, all of these elements have an additional IFC classification reference that has this eTIM code and name. But it's not just a classification reference, because eTIM also has properties. So all of these properties, empty properties, are also added to all of these objects, and the user is being asked to fill it out. Also in bSDD, there's this XSD restrictions where you can restrict the values with enumerations or ranges or whatever. So this is basically giving a user a template, fill in these properties, and then all of that data is being added to the IFC file. In this case, Akka then makes a new version of the IFC file. You can download it, and as soon as you open that in any kind of viewer, you can see that those objects now have an additional IFC classification reference, which is an eTIM photovoltaic cell, and all of those additional eTIM properties as well. So the idea here, not only the idea, but also strong business case, is that users that need to add these additional semantics to an IFC file almost can't do it wrong in this way. You get the template, you just have to fill in the values. The software implements it in a standardized way, how to add these classification references and properties. The story goes on as well, because everything in the bSDD has a unique resource identifier, a URI. Those can also be added to the IFC file. So when you have an IFC file with all of that information, you can also refer to online product manufacturing databases to automatically find products that match these requirements. I think Frederick will dip his toes into that problem as well a little bit. But this is the base case. So for eTIM, this was the example. There's another example which is a little bit more complex. It's a SketchUp example. So this is similar setup, but an IFC file that needs to be enriched with NLSFB, the Dutch classification system, so not eTIM. And the Dutch classification is only classes, so it's not properties. But what happens here is, as you will see, so the user selects a wall here, then they select in the bSDD plugin, they select the NLSFB classification system, the domain, and the NLSFB, I think it has about 250, 300 different classes, maybe even more. But now I select NLSFB and I only get this list of 20 classes. And the reason for that is because I've selected this object, and this is my IFC wall. So the call towards the bSDD is not just give me all of the NLSFB classes, but give me the NLSFB classes that inside the bSDD have been linked to an IFC wall. So I'm only getting the 21 as a result, kind of a pre-filter already. I can also do a free text search. And so that's really the way how you implement it. So Akka gives the full list. This tool gives kind of uses the preset filter. The link between these NLSFB classes and the IFC entities is made by the owner of this NLSFB domain. Not randomly done by anyone. The owner of the NLSFB domain also owns the relations to other domains. So now, like I said, you can also do further free word free text search, but in this case, the user already sees this 2122 class, double clicks it, and then a lot of things happen and starts flickering. And what actually happened is that the 2122 classification reference is being added to this object. So as you see, this is buitenwandelijk constructief. It's a load-bearing outer wall, 21, 22. So by double-clicking here, that data, which basically came in through the bSDD API, is now being added to this file, and when you export it, it's an IFC classification reference. But what also happened is that inside the bSDD, like I said, this 2122 class is being connected inside bSDD to IFC door, but it's also connected to two IFC properties, load-bearing and external. So this is a little bit of a different example than before. Before in ETIM, we had an ETIM object, an ETIM classification with ETIM properties. In this case, we have an NLSFB classification that does not have its own properties, but is linked to IFC properties again. So in this case, the properties, yeah, it's difficult to see, but you can also see that these are properties from the IFC domain. So in IFC, load-bearing and is external can be true, false, or undefined. But in this relation, the NLSFB maintenance committee has said this class needs to have these two IFC properties, but the value can only be true. So as you see on the left here, on double-clicking, it didn't only add the classification reference, but it also added is external and load-bearing set true. So again, from a use case perspective, it's very efficient if the user is being asked to further enrich an IFC file. It's not just adding a classification reference, it's also adding these properties, and in this case, even with preset values that the user doesn't have to set themselves. Any questions up until this point? All right.
Just all of these different mechanism options are encoded in the bSDD data specification?
Yes. Okay. So underlying data structure of bSDD is a combination of ISO 12063 and 23386.
Oh,
yeah, thank you for asking the question. I can brag a little bit about knowing the numbers. So yeah, the data structures and the relations are based on a standard. We started with the long history and heritage on bSDD. Let's forget about all of that and make something that actually works. We did that, and then we looked at the standard, and there was really a good match. So also, yeah, it was comforting to see that both the ISO committee and us came to the same conclusion, because it kind of brought value to both tracks that there seems to be something else going on. Yep.
This is more of a bSDD implementation question. Are authors currently limited to public standards only right now?
No, we also have the opportunity to publish private domains, where you need to log in first, and then when you search the database, you're getting content. That's not really being used that much at the moment, as in not really. It's really only experiments. And
It will be.
it will be. Yeah. Promise? But that also it gives me the opportunity to talk about another use case, because this is not just a use case, you also made a business case on this. And when you look at the contractor, what contractors usually do is they send out a design model to their manufacturers and suppliers, and they say, okay, and further engineer your parts and bring it back. So one design model is being sent to a lot of manufacturers and suppliers, and then like 50 or 100 different IFC files come back with walls and windows and precast stuff, and that needs to be coordinated. So open up Solibri again every Friday afternoon. They check it against the original design, but they also coordinate between the different manufacturing models. And what always goes wrong is that half of the models from the manufacturers don't have the correct information. It just doesn't run on the Solibri rule sets because it doesn't have the correct properties, or didn't use the predefined material list, or it made a typo in the property name. And we looked at how much that happens, and it's only like 3 or 4%, but it happens every week on every transaction, every time again. So the business case for using the bSDD for contractors like that is massive. Which a normal contractor could kind of, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share the numbers, but so the reason why those contractors want to share this publicly is that they work with different manufacturers, they work with different suppliers, and they just want to put it out there. They just want to publish it publicly and say, this is the domain you need to use. Please use it as good as possible, because it's also in their interest to share that publicly. Yep.
Discussion on the buildingSMART side about a bSDD.
Yeah, forget about that. It's all, there's a lot of heritage and history. We've relaunched this new bSDD in August also because there was this new ISO 1206 standards. Agents is something of the past. It was a failed business model to get people work for free. If you want to work for free, you can be an agent. There's no problem with that. Yeah, maybe last, well, what are we on time? Yeah, I wanted to say something else as well, but maybe do Erik first to point you to the resources where you can find everything. Erik, are you able to unmute and share screen?
Yes, I am.
Right.
That one.
So Erik Baars is the main developer of the bSDD. bSDD runs on Azure cloud at the moment, so it's very easy to scale up as well. We're using the API manager. It's very secure and protected, etc. Erik does most of the development and the maintenance and the support, even as well these days. So he's able to point you best to all of the Swagger Hub documentation and the examples. Are you also going to mention the support email address, Erik?
Yes, it's also on the list.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, start with where you can find documentation. It's buildingSMART bSDD in GitHub. There you can find, you should be able to find all the information you need. And if not, then you can always please let us know. It also lists the support email address you can send an email to. In here you see some frequently asked questions. It's more general and more on the technical side, how you can test the bSDD. I will show some of them to you in a few moments. But in here you can find the hyperlinks and where to find some more documentations. And all the documentation is inside this same repository. We'll show you later on. We have a test environment. You can request a domain, as we call it, like NLSFB or EDIM. Those are called domains. And you can request one and then upload your own data in a test environment just for testing it, see how it works, see what's possible. And then nice to know, well, the video you saw just a few minutes ago, both videos, some more information and IDs, how you can use it. And here on the bottom, you can see the email address you can send emails to get some support. I'll go into some examples first before I will show you the model. The bSDD is meant for communication between systems, computer systems, but as a user also wants to see what's inside the bSDD, we also added a search website. So you can have a little grasp of what's inside the bSDD. You can check, okay, what I just uploaded, is that okay in bSDD? In this case, well, let's take the EDIM one. You see the classifications found when I search by renewable. And one of the classifications inside EDIM is renewable energy. Inside bSDD, you can structure your classifications in a parent-child relation in a tree. And in here you see that the classification renewable energy has a parent classification, and that one's the all sectors. So the search website is merely to give you an impression on what's inside bSDD. Has my data been imported like I intended it to be imported into the bSDD? We have a small management app. I'm going to log in, need to log in. I'm going to use this one.
So one quick question, Erik.
Yes, please go ahead.
On the search, can you filter by region so that lots of these standards are only applicable in some parts of Europe? Can you filter down to the domains? Can you filter by region?
No, you cannot. You can filter after you entered a search criteria. You can filter on the domain. If you're only interested in IFC, then this one filters out all non-IFC. But you cannot filter on region. No. Maybe that's a good idea, but our main focus is on the API because the bSDD is meant for system-to-system communication. So, and then later on, we can always update the search website if there is a lot of requests for it. The management app, if you own a domain, you can log into the management app. You can see which domains you have and optionally delete them if it's not the most recent version. Although that deleting domains has been disabled for the production environment, but that's another thing. Uploading domain you do by selecting a JSON file. You can first validate it. And in this case, in this example, it shows some warnings. A warning means, well, you might need to fix it, but from the BSBB perspective, it's okay to get your data into the bSDD. So when I'm not validating only and I do an upload, the file will be imported into the bSDD. And for example, let's search for, no, I need to go to the test environment. This one. And we created a fictitious test domain with a test company only meant for demo purposes. And to my surprise, when I search for fruit, the unit class has some fruit-specific classifications. Didn't know that, but just an aside. And this is the data I just imported via the XML file. Can show you the XML file. It contains, okay, for which organization are you uploading and what is your domain code. You need to request these upfront. If you can't just pick a random organization code or a domain code. We supply those for you. You can use versions. You can also upload the same version. Of course, when you upload the same version, that's not, you should not do that if you made a lot of important changes. But if you made some fixes of typos, then you can just upload the same version again. There is no check on that in the bSDD. When you upload the same version, the bSDD will remove the old version first and then upload the new data. Some more specific domain information if available. We support multi-languages. The domain can have one or more classifications. In this case, it's the fruit is a classification. Vegetable was a classification as well. And an apple. And an apple has a parent classification, and that's fruit. So that's how you link classifications within the bSDD itself. You can also add relations to other classifications. For example, the vegetable classification has a reference to the IFC URI. See, this should not import correctly. This is apparently wrong, but it should be like this. This one references the unique class, and that was the one I showed you earlier on the search website. All details, well, most of the details of this JSON structure you can find on GitHub in the model, import model, and the bSDD JSON import model. Describes all fields inside the JSON. So, well, yeah, that's about the that's about the import file. You can also download your domain, but actually you get your latest uploaded import file on this one. So if you lost it, you can download it again from the bSDD. And as said, the most important goal of the bSDD is to provide APIs for systems, computer systems, to get the data. This is the user interface in which you can browse through the APIs available. You can see the specifications. For example, added a new one. I'm going to search for renewable. I'm not going to filter on the main namespace URIs. I'm not going to filter on related IFC entities. I'm going to execute it, and you get the result back in JSON format, as that most computer systems should be able to read that format. IFC door should be IFC and door execute. And you get the result for different domains. Almost all items in the bSDD are identified using a URI. In this case, the domain namespace and the classification as well. Not sure if this one is going to work. I have to get one that's also available in the production environment. I guess this one is. Those URIs are actually meant for identification, but because humans are, well, if they see a URI and think, well, it's URL, they expect it to work, and it does. although the HTML returned is quite simple, you get the data. You can also request the data in another format. Currently, we are also testing RDF format. So if you specify on a technical level in the HTTP header that you would like to return RDF format, then you get the results back in RDF format. You should find that information all in here on the bSDD. Good.
Sorry, before you go on, what is the namespace URI and what convention is that? Is that it's not similar to the context in JSON LD, is it?
Well,
Everything
name.
you put in bSDD automatically gets the URI. You can't design it yourself.
Okay, so an entity has a URI. I mean, one of the elements, but the namespace, is that sort of, for example, the Dutch classification system would have I mean, what's the namespace URI?
You mean of the domain?
I guess, well, I just saw he just showed an example where in the specification, it has a URI to the namespace. Is the namespace of that entity, the namespace of the classification system, and is that mechanism similar to the context in JSON LD or other sort of like, and it's the pointer to the namespace of what?
Which example did you just show, Eric?
Can you go back to the code of your upload, the JSON code?
Okay.
Okay. What was that? Okay, so related classification URI. So that is the namespace. That is the URI pointer to the namespace of the classification system.
No, it's just a
Specification item.
Just the item.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's just a unique URI for this item.
Yeah.
Sorry, never mind.
Yeah, right.
If you want to make relations between objects and properties, you don't refer to the name, you refer
Okay,
to the
sorry,
unique
I thought it was
identifier.
something else.
I was just posting in the chat, how do you link a instance to a class?
You don't, not in the it's only classes.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get that direction. How do you go the other direction? So if
Yeah.
I'm in IFC or
Eric, can you show the table that we have on GitHub on how to implement bSDD things to IFC, the different versions of IFC?
Not sure what you mean. Different versions to IFC?
Yeah, it's under bSDD and then documentation.
I think it's the documentation on the construction there.
Yeah, this one.
Ah, this one.
So this explains what things inside bSDD need to be placed where in an IFC file. But are we at questions, or did you want to show something else as well, Eric?
No, I guess I've shown most of it. We got here another URL, services buildingSMART.org. Just a short sum up of the building smart services, currently the ones using bSDD. And well, yeah, that's actually a short walkthrough I wanted to show.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add that this is really, I think it's probably already overwhelming for many of the ones that see this the first time, but there's a lot more as well. So there's the RDF output, we have GraphQL interface as well. So bSDD is the main place where we publish things as linked data. IFC 4.3 classes and properties are all in there, so you can already link to that and basically extend IFC 4.3. There's really a lot of nice use cases of a contractor that is publishing their their concrete wall and linking to all of the different uniclass LSFP classes and properties and linking to European material lists. So people are really building their own workflows using bSDD and sharing those with others as well too. Yeah. There's ways to engage. You publish your own data in there or connect to the API to read the data. Highly encourage you to suit your best. And I think that's it so far. Erik, any last comments?
No, not from my side.
All right, thanks again. So just as a quick question. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, quick question. Regarding the private classes, just to see if I got it right. If an organization wants to have their own private classification, they will then get an organization code assigned to them. They will have their credentials, and then they can log in into the database to publish their own classification. How do you, is there an administrator of the organization that has their credentials for managing that, and then the other users get different credentials, or just?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we get this question really a lot, and then when we do the follow-up and say, okay, explain better what you want, how it works, there's always silence. So we got a lot of questions on private domains, but no one really sticks. So the formal answer is always the same. You have private data that you want to protect by giving us a list of user email addresses that can access it. Those are examples where there's a token that you need to put in because they sell their standards and you get a license token back. Those are examples where you need to connect to some kind of an online repository because it changes quite a lot. So all of these options are open for us. So yeah, we really want to engage on a custom case-by-case basis on how to deal with that.
Just this link, validate.buildingSMART.org. First, it doesn't go anywhere, but
it's after the break. Don't go ahead of schedule.
Okay, don't throw anyone off the game.
Are you aware of schema.org, and would you be willing?
Yes. Yeah. You do want to work for me. That's cool. Yeah. No, that's definitely on the roadmap. Not too high, I have to say, because we're still juggling a couple of features. But yeah, that's definitely.
Wait, what was the question?
Schema.org.
Yeah.
No, it is. Kind of web clearinghouse or web standards.
So what was the question then?
Are you going to work with published buildings?
That's definitely on the table. Yeah, it's really adaptive. All right. Yeah, looking on at time, I'm grabbing a little bit more time in this session and probably giving a little bit less in the next one because we have Frederick as well with an additional speech. You're using your own laptop, right? Yep. So Frederick is what's your title? It's not Frederick. Mr. Frederick Baars is trying to be useful at CoBuilder. Software architect?
No, BIM data architect.
BIM data architect?
Nobody knows what it is.
Used to work for BuildingSMART France, and in that period was the bSDD product manager. So really accelerated the adoption and usability of bSDD in that time. Then he decided to leave all of us and actually get paid for what he did at CoBuilder, but still a big fan and a big supporter of the bSDD, and actually does have some more time and funding to accelerate the adoption. Oh, that's me.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Somebody has to make him presenter.
Yep.
Then you need to upgrade trying to do that.
In
Sharing presenters mode.
yeah, that's good. Have you muted your speaker?
I'm muted.
I think you did, yeah. You're okay.
Okay, so, well, let's get this. So today, all I want to do is have some data. And I just want to tell you the full story of it. What Leon showed was how to use the content provided by bSDD for specific use cases. Erik showed us how to add content into bSDD through this JSON file, and what are the tools you can use to access it through API. And well, I would love to to give you the full story of it. I will wait after that because that will be a full demo. But, I will be in front. So yeah, the idea is to show you how you can manage the content that you want to push inside bSDD. Because if you want to have customizable, reliable content into this database service, you have to manage it one way or another. Then publish it into bSDD, then use it into some specific BIM tools. So let's say this is my story. I want to work with inner doors, which is some sort of classical. Sorry about that, but I'm working with the European standards. But let's imagine that's within ISO instead of EN. So I have a specific standard, which is talking about windows and doors. And this standard is providing some properties that are mandatory to be taken into account in your construction project. At the same time, I have a BIM model. It can be an IFC model. It can be in my authoring tool, like Revit, like Architect, whatever. And at some point, I will have to provide those properties which are required by law. And if everything is perfect in a perfect world, I would like to add product information. So not only adding the properties, but the values corresponding for those properties, and the values corresponding to a real product from real life, from a real manufacturer. So that's the story I want to tell you today. So first step, I will have to manage the content of my dictionary. As I told you, someone has to deal with, I need to create an inner door. This inner door will have this property, this property, this property. Those are connected to this standard. Then we will have to manage what Leon said about the mapping. That inner door is the same as an IFC door in the BIM model, as the Revit code in Revit, and blah, blah. So first step, I will have to manage this. And then I will create a JSON file. This JSON file will be imported in bSDD. That's what Erik told us. So this will be validated and pushed into bSDD database. Then second step, I'm in my authoring tool or whatever, in a CDE or in a BIM tool, I will upload my model, select my doors, and I will search into bSDD the matching entities. Back to the question we had about where can I use those properties, which region. In bSDD, you have a specific attributes which is called country of use. So by calling the API, you will be able to do this kind of filter by checking the value of this attribute. Maybe there are other ways, but that can be a possibility. So through the API, through the REST API, for example, bSDD will send me the results. I will update my BIM model with the properties I've chosen from bSDD. and send back information in the model. Third step, in another tool or the same tool, whatever, I will again upload my model, select those, and search for a product. So in there, let's imagine I have manufacturer catalog. Describe these products following the same definitions coming from the same source of truth, let's say, in this case bSDD. And this tool in my case is GoBin. Then I will be able to find the right door, describe following the same properties, and then I will be able to push the values corresponding to the properties, the real product values in my BIM model. So first I manage my dictionary. Second, I'm connecting my BIM model to bSDD to bring back the property I need, in my example, from a specific standard. And third step, I'm checking in a manufacturer catalog what are the real values of those properties. And then let's try to do it in real life, let's say. So we'll see all those steps. Like this. Okay, so I will. So this is CoBuilder Define. That's the tool that will allow me to manage to create my content following. I will play likely on with nice numbers, ISO 23386, ISO 12063, whatever all those numbers. There are strict workflows that I need to follow to be able to create this kind of content. And at the end, if I'm looking in this tool, I will have something called Inodor. Hopefully, if my connection is still fine, yep. So this is my Inodor. I will see definition, in this case in English, in Norwegian. If you like Norwegian, then and the list of all of the properties corresponding to it. What I told you, I will have the ability to say this Inodor can be the same as an IFC door in IFC4, as a Revit category, is blah, 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 blah. I can classify it in Uniclass. All this content, I manage it in a specific tool, and then this will be pushed inside bSDD after it. I can check that this Inodor has been described according to a specific standard, in this case European standard, but I have this information. And back to the question about private domains. So this can only be pushed to the private domain in bSDD, because that's paying stuff. So if you want to be able to use this European standard, you have to pay to buy it or to pay to access the code. So this may not be published publicly in bSDD, but in a private domain, so with the credentials Leon has been talking about. So that's the kind of thing that we will address, but yeah, we can do it. So you've got your reference document, and of course you've got the list of properties corresponding to it. And in my example, we will just work with one of those properties, which will be burglar resistant. Or it is burglar resistant according to EN, blah, 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 blah. And what is interesting is that this burglar resistance has a list of enumerated values attached to it. So the standard, as a European standard in this case, is saying for an Inodor, the burglar resistant class can be RC1N, RC2, RC2N, blah, 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 blah. So let's say I have managed my content, experts have validated what I've done, etc. I will press a button, and well, this is a technical meeting. So this is what I will obtain from Define. So Erik told you I have an organization code, that's me from CoBuilder. I have a domain, which will be CoBuilder template. I have the quality assurance that I've been using to create my content. I have the language of my content, UID, definition, name, date, revision date, and for example, in this case, I'm saying that this Inodor is corresponding to an IFC door, and I will have the list of all those properties with their possible units, data type, possible values, etc. Once I've got this file, I will be able to push it by bSDD using this. Erik has shown you, and then if I'm using it like this, I will have a look at Inodor. I will see that bSDD is providing just one Inodor, which is in CoBuilder data template. Cool, that's mine. We'll have look at it. So this is all the information coming from my JSON. Again, the domain, this template, when it has been created, quality insurance, who owning it, the related IFC entity, and the list of all the properties attached to it. Looking for my burglar resistance according to blah, 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 blah. Here it is, and if I definition, here is what ends in bSDD. So same information. Again, we created the description, data type, property value kind, and all those allowed values are attached to it, and the classification corresponding. So first part of my story, but I have managed the content of my dictionary, validated it with experts, blah, 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 pushed into bSDD, and then I will arrive to what can I do with this content. So in this case, we will see a new software, we've seen SketchUp, we have seen Aka, in this case that's a platform, a French one, called BinData. I will open the model, I click, not sure, yep. The model, here it is, load, yep, here it is. So this is my IFC file. Oh, now maybe sharing. So I will have a preview, and here I will ask the platform to play with bSDD. So same as the Aka demo. Here I have the list of possible domains I want to play with in my tool, and here today we are working with the buildingData template. So I will select buildingData template. Here we are. So in my model, if I select a roof, you can see that in the right part, nothing happens because, well, that's a slab. Nothing happens. So let's hide this slab, and I will this time select an IFC door. And here, this is not great anymore because by selecting an IFC door, tool has queried bSDD saying in the domain I'm using, buildingData template, so you have something I can attach to an IFC door. And if you remember well, when we have created this door, we said this is connected to an IFC door. That's the reason why now the tool is telling me, hey, I can propose you information for doors. Select it, and here is the list of properties coming from bSDD that I can attach to an IFC door coming from a European standard. These are the properties mandatory from this standard. And I will just search for my burglar resistant class. Here it is. I will just select it, and actually the one we've been dealing with since the beginning. And I told you, well, it should be in several steps, but I don't have so much time, so I told you what would be cool would be to be able to attach real product values to it. So let's imagine that I have a manufacturer called AB who is providing description of its doors following bSDD definition. In this case, so my AB manufacturer is providing doors which are described following the same dictionary. So I will find all the properties I've been dealing with in define, pushed in bSDD, but in this case, here I'm setting a door where burglar resistance is RC2. If you've been following, this was part of the enumeration we have had in the dictionary. So this is completely defined according to what I want to have. So in a perfect world, my BIM tool is connected to this through an API. That's possible, but this BIM tool is not. So, well, we will do the magic of copy-paste, and I will just add RC2 in here, and if I scroll down, and R is not at the right place, there, I will click Apply to Selection. And then my BIM model, my IFC model, is updated, and somewhere, blah, 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 I will find buildingData templates, burglar resistance according to and blah, 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 the value is RC2. And this will be embedded in my IFC. So that's the use case I wanted to show you about bSDD today. One tool to manage dictionaries, pushing to bSDD. One manufacturer providing its product information following the same definition. In any BIM tool, you can connect to bSDD. Check, well, I've selected an IFC door. I will find what can be connected to an IFC door. I mean, if it's in rate, I know the classification code of doors, if I same thing. If it's in architect from Rectorworks, if I have the code, same thing. Bring back those information which are coming from the standard, coming from the classification system, and then can connect to the manufacturer catalog, to bring back the real information of the product. And that's it. I hope I didn't take too much time. Questions? Crystal clear?
Online then.
But yeah, about the question about, we were discussing about units earlier, managed units. You can decide what kind of system of units you want to use. Back to the private domains, yes, we can do it, and that's important because in my example, this should not be public. To pay to be able to use this ESB. And about regions or domains, you've got specific attributes. Play with
I don't know where to address this question, but where should workflow go? Like in define, you can clearly say by stage where these properties apply.
Yep.
But when they go to bSDD, that logic disappears.
So you saw it.
I pay attention. And that's useful information, but it clearly is not. It's not. It doesn't make sense to have that global thing. So it's just a question of where does that logic persist if you want to persist it in our world?
That's a really good one, and that's connected to the IDS discussion too. In here, you are able to say this milestone. Not one purpose, one milestone. That's the list of where it can be used. The reason why is we have another tool where you can select for this purpose, this milestone, this sector should provide this information. And then this will be exported in IDS. But yes, in bSDD, we don't push this information, but that's reason. Everything is connected, yeah.
So a nice look ahead would be to actually use IDS to request parameters from bSDD, give to a user. If that
Yep.
Putting those two things together.
And IDS can support bSDD URIs. That's ready to be used. So at least that's my plan, to use it like this, and then they are on the same page.
Can support any URIs, not just the bSDD. I want to make the principal point of this.
But yeah, the idea is to connect these to requirements. I mean, that's the goal.
All right, I guess everyone is in need of a caffeine shot. Thank you again, Frederick. A couple of messages. So after the coffee break, we have the workshop from Johan. I'm sorry, my French is just too bad. Johan. Thank you. For that, the idea is that you all try to use the validation service on your own laptop. You upload your own IFC file, see if you can break it. A couple of links that you need are being shared. Dan shared the email with all of your contact details. In that email, you'll also find the links that you need after the coffee break. Coffee break we're going to do until 11:30. So for the people online, that's about 25 minutes from now. But before the coffee break, we're going one floor down first to do a group picture. So if we will all follow Dan, our leader again for today. One floor down, do a group picture, then one floor up again for the coffee, and back here at 10:30 with the email open.